Hey, team players. Today we're going to discuss the Baltimore Ravens, what they look like moving forward into 2023 in the immediate aftermath of the draft overall. So, when we look at what the Ravens did over the span of the weekend here, obviously the big news, the ESPN winners of the offseason, because they did this, they brought in Beckham and they finally gave a really, really big contract to Lamar Jackson. And aside from the 17 delusional diehards in the Raven world, the rest of the NFL is laughing at them. So, Bob, why don't we start with there about how Lamar Jackson completely held this team hostage the entire offseason by them not being able to figure out to play nice, and the fact that they added a inevitable nuclear bomb into their locker room by putting in the receiver loves causing locker room problems in Odell Beckham Jr. So,
Yes,
Bob,
so
take it away.
let's think about that together, Joe. And as everybody who's watching knows, we've been watching football all season. We're big fans, but when it comes to toxic environments, there's no bigger fan than the Baltimore Ravens of a toxic environment. Now, this culture in the Ravens, and I'm not sure if it's the GM, the president, I really don't know what's going on there. I don't live in Baltimore, don't follow them as well as I, should, I guess. But it seems like at every point in time, every year, we're talking in the offseason about something that the Ravens did that's causing something bad to happen in the locker room. Now, at this point in time, it is purely self-inflicting wounds. Mm-hmm. You went out, and as you said, Joe, you get one of the biggest prima donnas in football today, in Odell Beckham Jr.
Possibly ever.
There hasn't really been a wide receiver since maybe Owens, maybe Dez Bryant, who has had an attitude like Odell Beckham. Now, Odell Beckham is skilled. There's no doubt about that. But in recent years, there has been a lot of injury concerns. Mm-hmm. And your two biggest signings, in a way, offensively, were Lamar Jackson to the big contract and Odell Beckham. Now, in the draft, you went out there and you took Zay Flowers, which is a good addition to the team that you need.
That's my problem, Bob. I believe that's the multiplier effect.
Let me get to my point. In and of itself, Joe, when you add a player that you don't know how they're going to work in the locker room with one another, by himself, Zay Flowers is not a problem.
No, he's not the problem.
When it comes to adding him, a young wide receiver who's going to learn from a veteran, the veteran you don't want him to learn from is Odell Beckham Jr. Mm-hmm. Just like you don't want people to learn from Juju Smith-Schuster or people of that nature, you don't want people coming in and saying, like, okay, this is my attitude. I'm gonna get on the field and I'm gonna do X, Y, Z. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. And if it doesn't work out for me, I'm gonna throw a fit Odell is the biggest person who does this in the league today. And when you pair a young wide receiver, now let's not forget that Rashad Bateman is still on this team. And it's not so long ago that we were saying Rashad Bateman isn't that bad as a fantasy play, isn't that bad in real life. Well, where this all comes to a head, though, is Lamar Jackson. We know, and there's a meme that goes around, that Lamar Jackson and Odell Beckham will probably give us the three best games we'll see if we're a Ravens.
They'll win September, them and the Dolphins.
But then it will fall apart at some point in time. And when you had a player in Lamar Jackson who didn't want to come back even though he was healthy because he was getting bad contract stuff, we would assume. And then you have a player like Odell Beckham who will throw a fit. And then you have a young guy who wants to play. You've got a lot of toxic energy in the room for these young guys from the draft entering the league. Now they're all good players. Assumedly, that's why they got drafted.
Two of them are.
But also they didn't address many other needs that they were having. Cornerback, a glaring need. And they took a guy in the 5th round who projects to be a backup.
Yeah, and they really didn't touch edge rusher either. I know that they got Robinson. They got Robinson from Ole Miss, but he's not going to be a good pro. We go to ESPN's ranking grade of him. They project him to be a 62. 62 barely makes the practice squad. So
And here's
that's
the
not
other
solving
thing.
your edge rushing needs in the 4th round.
Here's the other
And
thing.
we look at who they, who they could have had, who the Steelers took 4 rounds later, or correction, 4 picks later, and Herbig, who ESPN has drafted grade as an 82. It makes you wonder, where is the Ravens going with this? They wanted to have a lanky speed guy, and they could have had a better one who was just a little bit shorter from a more proven program in Wisconsin. It's mind-boggling what the Ravens front office. The Ravens front office failed more than any other front office this offseason.
What's more mind-boggling about this is that Zay Flowers pick in the 1st round.
Huh?
Now, the Baltimore Ravens already have guys that can stretch the field. They already have guys that can do that. The problem isn't
the quarterback can't get it to.
The problem isn't the guys that they have. It's that the quarterback that they have is making decisions that affect those players negatively. Like we said, now you take Odell Beckham Jr., who is affected very much by negative play of quarterbacks, and that's not going to be a good combination. Likewise, one of the biggest things they needed to do was their defense was the best part about their team for many years. It was not the best part about their team last year until Roquan Smith came. And even then, it was mostly in the middle of the pack, as the stats show. And so you went out there, and let me take a look at who they got in the 2nd round. I believe they got the
Ravens did not have a 2nd round pick.
They didn't have a 2nd round pick.
Okay. No, they went to Chicago.
So you went out there, and at the 86th pick, you got Trenton Simpson, who's a good player, really good player out of Clemson. But why in the 1st round would you not have taken, Brzee at tackle?
But a major upgrade.
Tackle, that would have been a major upgrade for you. You would have been set to make that decision to take the wide receiver in the 2nd or 3rd round, because as we know, out of all the players in the league, when we think about 1st rounders, we often will say that those positional players like wide receiver and running back have some of the biggest chances to bust out of anybody in the draft. Now, that's not to say that any of them can't, but taking a defensive tackle who's designed to stop the run in a division that has good running backs is probably a good decision to make, because we're not setting the world on fire in cornerbacks in the AFC North. And so when you look at what you did with the team, you didn't address the 2 glaring needs that you had. And that's the thing that really bugs me, is defensive line and cornerback were the 2 biggest needs, and you did basically nothing.
Yeah, so when we look at the Ravens, this whole offseason came down to one mistake, which was to placate Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson held this team hostage in the offseason. They weren't able to sign any free agents because he was under the franchise tag, and until he signed his contract, they couldn't have changed anything. The only thing they brought in was Odell Beckham on a manipulated contract that's basically a 1-year deal to lower the cap hit. And then when we look at the 1st pick, again, placating Lamar, give him another target. He doesn't throw the ball into tight windows. He's not accurate. He's worse than Eli Manning, who Odell Beckham basically destroyed. And we look at this team, they, instead of trying to do the best thing to make them win, they placated the player that they made the face of their franchise, who, by the way, no other team in the NFL would have as their quarterback if he was free. And they negotiated with themselves. Dude, they wouldn't. He cannot complete an accurate pass. He's an upgrade over the starting quarterback of Lamar Jackson is better than Kyler Murray and the obvious scrubs like in Miami. But you can't build a passing game around him. So he wouldn't even work in Miami. Baltimore redesigned their entire team for Lamar Jackson when they made him the full-time starter.
That's true. 100%.
And no other team has attempted to do this, with the exception of Chicago, with what they're trying to do with Fields. So no other team in one offseason was going to rip themselves apart to build a Lamar Jackson landing pad. They were fighting with themselves. They went all in and created a situation where They gave him Odell Beckham Jr., who literally no one else in the league wanted. They signed him at basically the dead period of free agency after everyone has been taken that was a desire, and they just basically created a crap contract for him.
This is really it's really something to say about Odell Beckham, and really something to say about the Ravens organization, is that there were a lot of other teams that needed wide receiver help this year.
And had money to do it.
And Odell Beckham did not cross their minds.
Mm-mm.
So that's something to say about the desperation
of both sides,
the Ravens, and the desperation of Odell Beckham. And it speaks more to that signing of, or to the pick of Zay Flowers, is that you know that Odell Beckham isn't going to be there for the future, so you go out and get a guy that you think can be there for the future, which makes sense to me. That was that is
quarterback can play the pass.
That's what they're thinking, is that's a good core concept. But for the whole history of the Ravens organization, you have had players like Lamar, or you've had Jamal Lewis, you've had a stud, and that stud has been able to take you just enough offense to win games that your defense, which are the real studs of this team, is able to stop the other team. And the whole problem with the Ravens organization now is that they have transitioned from being the defensive stalwart that they have been to now playing the fence. And going into a draft playing the fence for the Baltimore Ravens this year was probably not the best way to do this, because they had so many, for a team that was, a playoff, what happened here is we're seeing them saying, okay, we signed Lamar 2 days before the draft. We've got our quarterback situations figured out. So now what do I need to do? And I think that they were more concerned about signing Lamar, and then, like you were saying, Joe, taking somebody to surround him with. But Lamar doesn't, and we've talked about this before. We've talked about it numerous times. You have said on numerous occasions that nobody wants to play with Lamar. Now,
they don't.
I don't believe that that's 100% accurately true, but I do think that the way they've built the team around what they allow Lamar to do is one of the reasons why we see not a lot of high-profile, valuable players going to Baltimore on offense, except they go away from Baltimore on offense. I think it's the system that has been constructed because of Lamar, but not necessarily not wanting to play with Lamar the person, but they don't want to play with Lamar the system.
Well, the best receiver they ever had couldn't wait to sprint out the door in Hollywood Brown. He doesn't throw an accurate pass. He has a diva who can no longer get open.
We can talk till we're blue in the face about Lamar, because
I don't get why they didn't get a pass rusher, Bob. This is the thing I don't understand. The one that Cincinnati ended up taking later in the draft,
Murphy,
out of Clemson, was amazing. He's a great edge rusher, good speed around the edge, and they neglected. And there was also still great corners on the board, because the one thing about the AFC North is, depending upon how good you think Watson is, there's somewhere between 2 top 5 and 2 top 10 quarterbacks in Ohio. And they hate the Ravens more than they hate the Steelers, which is awesome, but also weird. And the simple fact is that you don't have the ability to get in Watson's grill or cover. And that's the one with the number 2 list of options. I don't see a scenario where these guys will even be competitive against Cincinnati. And I see no scenario where we're going to be looking at this team and saying it wasn't the biggest fluff of the year. In terms of most wins to loss conversion,
here's what I want to bring up.
Ravens got the money.
Here's what I want to bring up, Joe. And this is something that I think we think about during when the draft is happening, but then looking on it after the draft is really important. People are always talking about positional value in the draft. I like, you need to go out and get positional value because and they rank, and NFL.com ranked the Ravens draft as an A.
Yeah, that's the problem
Let's
with positional
let's
value.
let's put that into perspective. The Ravens' needs were cornerback, wide receiver, defensive line. And as I'm looking at this,
They didn't get a defensive lineman.
we're getting an edge rusher in the 4th round,
Who's not going to be good.
a cornerback in the 5th round, wide receiver in the 1st round. How does that accumulate to an A in terms of this positional value? If you take those players on just their merit alone and you ignore all of that positional value conversation, and you just take these players and say, are these players good for this organization? What I'm seeing is a player that's going to be highly tied to your quarterback. And so is that player going to be successful? Depends on your quarterback. Trenton Simpson probably could be fairly successful because that linebacking core could be pretty good.
Look, can I hit a quick point on Simpson out of Clemson?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a general fear I have from big time program middle linebackers, and this is a universal thing. We're talking Ohio State, Bama, all the rest of them. Middle linebackers in the NFL do not get protected anymore. That doesn't exist in the current way the defensive interior lines are built. So in college, they are protected, and they're not used to getting people come up on them and attacking them. And again, this is a big school generality. My fear with big school middle linebackers, which Clemson certainly qualifies as, is that they look a whole lot better whenever they're going against the Bowling Greens of the world than they do on Sunday, because now they're getting people up on their grills, and play actions are much harder and quicker to identify and all of that. I don't have a problem drafting a middle linebacker in the 3rd round, but this is why I prefer diving into a smaller school or one of the bad Power 5 schools, your Indianas of the world, because he's going to be going from a space where he was perfectly protected to not. And you'd think by now that Baltimore would learn from this mistake. He's literally replacing Patrick Queen from LSU, who had this exact same problem and couldn't get off a block or make a read. In fact, there's when we did the strategies of football, when these guys played Miami earlier in the year, Tyreek Hill torched him by himself, Patrick Queen, 3 different times. Those 3 plays by themselves were like 150 yards.
Yeah, so, and you would say, and I would say too, that Trenton Simpson is a little bit too aggressive at times in what he's doing, because if you're coming down as a linebacker into the box and you are trying to diagnose your play, then you have to be aware of everything else behind you as well. And for the Baltimore Ravens, you have Roquan Smith that is really efficient at doing his job. Now, if you put in Trenton Simpson on, one of the outside positions, you're probably going to get burned or torched until he's able to learn the system. Now, will you give enough time for him to be able to do that? Will you keep him on your roster?
70 points the Bengals put up while he's learning, though.
Right? You don't have you really honestly are not going to give that much. He might be a situational player for this year. Might be a 2-down player, maybe on 3rd down only, if they can diagnose and if he gets to where he's going. So do I think it's a bad pick? No, I don't think it's a bad pick at all. But to say the Ravens had an A draft is definitely a misnomer, because they did not address their biggest needs, and their biggest thing that they did address is tied to the player that is now locked into these 3 guys in Bateman, Flowers, and Beckham. And the difference maker that Zay Flowers could be is probably not going to make a difference. We're probably going to see Zay Flowers at hovering maybe 700 yards, maybe 36, 46 catches, and maybe 3 touchdowns. You're going to see those Devin Duvernay numbers on Zay Flowers. And is that an A? No, it's not.
And the other giant elephant on the offensive room that we didn't even get to yet is they haven't replaced their guard departure who went to Denver. And they threw a 7th round stab out there that ESPN has graded as a 43 out of 100. So for your Madden rating, they put a 43 as their only addition all offseason. This includes free agency to trying to replace that guard.
Yeah.
So very important. Their best running plays are behind the left guard to the left, and they don't have one. They basically went for shiny glitter instead of making a good meal. This is how
But
a
it's not even
4-year-old makes
glitter.
breakfast.
But it's not even glitter. It's just
It's shallow and empty.
nothing. It's a nothingness. And I mean, and that's to say for Ravens fans that this situation is a crapshoot for them, because your team is probably still going to be in playoff contention. We're probably going to be talking about the Baltimore Ravens sitting
If
there
Lamar stays healthy.
Because Lamar Jackson, when healthy, is worth 9 wins, 8 wins by himself. And that's the problem with this organization, is that they are over-reliant on one guy, and it's not a team. They've moved away from being reliant on a team. When you see the Trent Dilfers of the world being able to be efficient game managers and a really, really good defense, now you're taking that and you're saying, I'm going to be like Arizona with Kyler Murray, or I'm going to be give me another the Colts with Jonathan Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
You take just one guy, or Derrick Henry with the Titans. Sure, you can make the playoffs, but you're not going to be going far because it takes a team effort. We see this all the time from Kansas City, and even the best team in Philadelphia couldn't beat Kansas City because Kansas City had something more. So we could be talking Ravens in the playoffs, but it's not going to be exciting.
And we might be, and we got to wrap this one up here. But for all the people out there who try to fight about Lamar's longevity, his strength, playing at the end of the game, playing at the end of the season, playing in meaningful games, he has been a starting quarterback now for 4 years. In those 4 years, there's 8 opportunities to play every division team. He has only been a starting quarterback against the Pittsburgh Steelers 3 out of 8 times. Meaning that when it's a meaningful, important division game, he's not available, or he opts not to be available, however you want to put it. Coincidentally, in those 3 games, he does average 5.5 sacks against. So there's reason not to want to be on the field against that defense. And that was before TJ for the first 2 of them. So with that being said, he's a guy who gets hurt a lot. He's a guy who likes being in charge with a group around him that just gave them every single thing possible to placate him. If he's not happy now, you don't have a future in the Baltimore Ravens. The only hope the Ravens have moving forward is Lamar Jackson stays healthy. He returns to the MVP status, which he hasn't been for 3 years, and their Hall of Fame coach can keep plugging the holes before the entire boat sinks.
It's true.